Hello world, it's Austin. Let's talk about being transgender and Christian. This week's video isn't one of the new themed ones. This is just going to be me talking to you because I heard a great text in church last weekend and I want to talk to you about it. I was lucky enough to be able to volunteer for the Why Christian conference that happened here in Minneapolis last weekend, and it was amazing. We had 13 speakers from all over the place, but they were all women, which was kind of a breath of fresh air for a lot of people, including me. All the speakers attempted to tackle the same question, which was basically, why in a time and place when Christianity has done so many terrible things and still continues to do many terrible things, why do we still consider ourselves to be Christians? Why do we continually choose this faith? Everybody had their own answer, but as Rachel Held Evans, one of the coordinators and founders of the conference, tweeted, there were a couple of themes that kept popping up over and over again. The speakers talked about the importance of sacraments, they talked about being moved by music, they talked about Christianity's ability to redeem suffering, they talked about the importance of human dignity, and the importance of God naming us beloved. And one thing that it seemed like every speaker talked about was the importance of the Incarnation for their theology, and what that means about our bodies now. During the service at the very end of the conference, the reading was from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, and I want to read a little bit of that to you now, because when I heard it, I immediately connected it to my experience of being trans. So this is 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 7 through 12, and Paul and his protege Timothy are writing to the congregation in Corinth. Paul's just finished saying that he and Timothy have received the light of the knowledge of the glory of God through Jesus Christ, and he's talking about how important that is and how it's considered a treasure. So then Paul says, "But we have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down but not destroyed, always carrying in our bodies the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies. For while we live, we are always being given up to death for Jesus' sake, so that the life of Jesus may be made visible in our mortal flesh. So death is at work in us, but life in you." And I felt something so powerful when I heard those words, this affirmation that life can come out of death, that power is perfected in weakness, and that the light shines in darkness and the darkness cannot overcome it. It's such a fascinating metaphor to me because he's talking about his body as the clay jar, or as a clay jar that's easily broken or chipped. It's maybe not the best quality because clay jars were generally used by lower classes of people in Paul's time, but at the same time, he's been given something of infinite, incredible value, and because he holds that in himself, it makes his body and all of him of more value. He's also saying that he holds Christ's death in his body, and simultaneously holds the truth of the resurrection in his body, and that ability to hold two seemingly opposite things within flesh and bone is just so powerful. It's a brain teaser, and it's fascinating. Many of the speakers at the conference talked about having a hard time with their bodies. Many of them talked about their body image as women, and some, like Austin Channing and Mickey Kim Court, talked about their experiences being embodied as people of color. Reverend Kerlin Richter, who talked about some of her past experiences with self-harm and with substance abuse, also talked about the importance of God's incarnation in Jesus. She said, "I am a Christian because having a body wasn't always good news for me, but then I met good news that had a body." That resonated with me in such a powerful way because a couple of years ago, when I was in a really bad place emotionally before I came out as trans, I wished that somehow my body could just stop existing. As a trans person, having a body has not always been good news for me. But what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4 is cleansing for me. It's healing to know that even though I have a body that sometimes feels too easily broken, or not strong enough, or not gendered the right way, or just generally not ideal, it helps to hear Paul's words in this chapter. Paul says that these bodies that are sometimes afflicted are not crushed. Though we may be persecuted for these bodies, we are not forsaken and we are not alone. Though in the very worst times we may be struck down, but we are not destroyed because God's light lives inside us. If our bodies are God's gift to us in creation when we are made in God's image, then God's gift to us in the Incarnation is a knowledge of that worth. We are given value inside and out because we are loved. So as transgender people, how can we let the life of Jesus be made visible in our bodies, as Paul says? That's something I'm still trying to work out, and I would love to hear your feedback about it. Paul seems to be saying that we carry Jesus in our bodies when we remember his death and when we remember our eventual deaths, like we do on Ash Wednesdays when we affirm that we move from dust to dust. But I would venture to say that we also carry Christ in our bodies when we enact that resurrection movement from death into life, and that's how many of us feel about transition. For many of us, that feels like moving from death into life, or maybe from a really deep sleep into living, breathing reality. And maybe we're still clay pots in the end, but we're clay pots that have been filled with so much love that we end up spilling over. Thanks for watching this week's video, everybody. I hope it resonated with you, and if it did, leave me a comment either below or on Twitter, and I'd love to hear from you. I hope you're having a great Wednesday, and I will see you back here next week. Peace.